Getting there. So what we're going to do today is we'll provide a bit of an update on what GIRI are doing and some feedback from our previous forum. And then the focus of today is to look at behaviours, because it was identified that behaviours, we understand, are going to be one of the key challenges that face us as we work our way through this crisis, and in particular the way different people within our organisations are likely to react and behave. So we'll have a look at the behaviours we expect to see, or we are seeing, and then I'll deliver a short lesson, so a learning bite, if you like, which is an extract from our supervisors and managers training course, which focuses specifically on behaviours. And then we're going to take that lesson content and reflect it back on the situation we're currently in, and basically for all of you to come up with what are the next steps. What can we do, given our current situation, in order to influence behaviour that is going to prevent it? And then we will sum up, and Tom will provide a bit of a summary, and hopefully you'll all leave with some fairly useful nuggets of things that we might be able to do to influence behaviour so that we reduce errors throughout this really challenging time. So before I do that, what I want to do is just play a very short video that
Members of the Get It Right initiative have done a lot of research into different types of error. They wanted to get an idea of how much it's costing us. We've created this imaginary construction world to explain and illustrate the findings of that research. These are our clients, and this is the building they're going to construct. In total, we reckon UK clients of all kinds spend around £100 billion on construction every year. How much of this do we think is wasted on error?
We estimate that the cost to the industry is around 21%, and that 21% is made up of four elements: the actual cost of correcting the error, the indirect cost in terms of time of correcting that error, what we call our unrecorded process costs, and finally, latent defects.
So, the research came up with a figure of 21% for the total cost of error. Let's break it down and take a closer look at the first of those four elements, the direct cost of error. We're probably all familiar with the scenario. You design and build something and subsequently find that it's wrong. So you have to spend extra money to do it again correctly, and this is costly. The estimate is that direct costs of error like this hurt the industry to the tune of about £5 billion a year. Where does this figure come from?
The information we have, because there is no consistent standard across the industry, was our non-conformance reporting. That's where we've actually notified that something hasn't gone to plan, we've recorded it, and we've actually recorded, or we've estimated the cost, the direct cost of actually just putting that error right.
But that's not all. Along with the direct costs, there are the indirect costs associated with these errors. The indirect costs can be even greater than the direct costs. For example, you may need time and resources to investigate the error, and there might be knock-on effects to the project, such as programme delay. Both of these will have an impact on other members of the project team. These costs are more difficult to estimate consistently across the industry, but the research suggests somewhere in the region of £7 billion a year.
That's on top of that 5% that I've already talked about. So together, that's a significant amount of money that effectively the UK construction industry is wasting every year.
The third category of error is unrecorded process waste. Unrecorded process waste results from concealing or never openly accounting for the costs of putting errors right. For example, replacing incorrect materials without the cost being recorded. The Get It Right initiative suggests this is another significant chunk of money wasted by the industry. The research estimates another £6 billion.
Yes, this is an estimate. I mean, by its very nature, people are not recording it, so it's very hard to be sure. If between inputs and outputs we're spinning around doing things over and over again, we're reducing our productivity. And so in this case, removing these errors and reducing the process waste enhances productivity. So it's a good thing.
The final piece of our chart is for errors that lead to latent defects. These arise following the completion of the project. They lie hidden until after the project has been accepted by the client. We reckon £3 billion of construction costs are as a result of the impact of latent defects, putting them right, and the associated costs of doing so. So, with a total value of construction currently at around £100 billion per year, the Get It Right Initiative research team reckon that £21 billion of that is wasted on error in one form or another.
These figures were what came out in our research, but they were also verified by talking to other people across the world. But I think perhaps the most important point is that they're not precise, but if you put into the context of 2 to 3% profit of the construction industry and 20-odd% in terms of the cost of error, there's an order of magnitude difference.
At the moment, we could be paying to do things 2 or 3 times. So let's just spend a little bit of time and effort making sure that we get it right and that we just do it once, and that will effectively save us all money in the future.
So I think I'm back in the room. So what I'll do now is I will hand over to you, Tom, if that's okay, for your introduction and summary. So Tom, over to you if you're there.
Thanks, Nick, and welcome to everybody. So can Helena share the screen again, or Nick, somebody share the screen?
Yeah, I'll share that again.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So I hope you found that the video was to be helpful in explaining our key messages of the Get It Right initiative. So just so you know, this video is part of the suite of training courses that we've developed over the last 18 months. I just want to say a few things about GIRI, and then I can hand back to Nick after that. Our strategic aim is to improve construction productivity and quality by eliminating error. So during Covid-19, we've been doing a few things to try and keep getting the message out. So we've been sending out newsletters, webinars, working group meetings are continuing, and looking at the issues raised for our industry by Covid-19. The world's going to change. That's absolutely sure. No question about it. Construction has to change. We need to be more efficient. We have to get it right. Just as an aside, I was talking to somebody yesterday who told me that he believes that because of social distancing, lots of organizations are looking more and more into off-site construction, which clearly means that productivity will go up and quality will go up. So there may be a silver lining to that particular cloud. So anyway, next slide, please. A key point, just to make it clear, is that we're about getting it right, not is it right, but get it right. So, and that's an important point. As Emma said in the video, if we only do it once, we're going to be a lot more efficient. Next slide, please. For those of you who don't know, we're currently 53 members, and you can see the list of people there. I'm not going to read that out, but quite a wide group of people. Next, original research showed that these were the root causes of error. And again, I'm not going to read them all out, but key points were to do with planning, culture, design and communication. At our previous sessions, we asked people what they thought the new root causes of error might be because of Covid-19. And you can see some of the potentials that are there. Underpricing of future work, the race to the bottom, sustainability and productivity, where work will come from, will there be enough, impact on people, poor and confusing regulation. And next slide, please. And also aligning the supply chain to start again productively. Also, some contractors may not exist going forward. I think you can see all those things, and none of those things will be a great surprise. But so what we want to try and do in our seminars that we're having at the moment is to address these issues. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Nick. So Nick, over to you again.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tom. So what we're going to have a look at today is behaviours. But before we dive into the behaviours, I'd like you all, please, to just think about one other thing. In the short video, we identified the 4 different costs associated with error. So we had our direct costs of error, indirect cost of error, unrecorded process waste, and latent defects. If you could please click on that link now and complete that survey, that would be great. And So this is really an opportunity for us to gauge what impact do we think the current COVID-19 crisis is going to have on these different types of error. So we can see we've had 7 responses so far. So for the direct cost, everyone is saying it's either a slight or a large increase. The indirect cost, even more people saying large. Unrecorded process waste, interestingly, it isn't quite such a clear picture. Someone saying no change, someone else saying a large decrease. So that's interesting. And also for the latent defects, again, similar. Some people thinking it could actually be an improvement. Maybe whoever said they anticipate for that latent defects, could someone unmute themselves if they think that there's an opportunity for a reduction there? So,
well, yeah, I don't think I would agree with that. I think there's probably, on my own experience, what I've seen the last couple of weeks when I've been involved in, I think there's less people to record actual defects now, with an emphasis on getting things finished. And I think there's a greater risk that latent defects will appear in due course and with no apparent records or reason behind them. Yeah, interesting. Okay, all right. And anyone else want to jump in on that? Anyone agree, disagree?
Ian Mills, I'm just thinking about that. I mean, it's interesting looking. I think sectors are going to perform differently. If I look at the work we're doing in highways, that's obviously it's a regulated sector. Under COVID, it's become more regulated because of the social distancing. So at the moment, I think I'm seeing tighter controls, and it may be that we have a bigger variation in the sectors in which we work because of what's happening. So maybe that's why you've got somebody coming back with a large decrease, because they're working in those sectors where you have good control already. Right. Maybe we'll see a variation, but I think you're right in general building construction where you don't have customers who are regulated. I agree with the majority. I do are there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Ian. That's really interesting. The idea that there's going to be even more variance between sectors. But actually, if we just have a look at those results, and I know it's only from 9 of, but we've got, everyone seems to agree that this is getting worse. Colin, I can see that you've got your hand up. What would you like to say?
It's interesting, Nick. We've got a limited number of construction contracts in Scotland at the moment called essential sites, and they're at limited amount of productivity. Probably 50 to 60% of the people who would have been on the site are on the site at the moment, but actually the 60% that are on site are the best. They're deliberately selecting the best guys to be there to get the most out of them whilst they're there.
Now that is really, really interesting that you say that, because you're identifying that actually different people are being impacted in very different ways by this current situation. So that sounds like what you're saying. Is that basically part of what you're talking about there?
Yeah, different people. Yeah, there are people who are being selected to be on site, and make up the 60% that are there, and they're choosing the best guys, the guys that they trust, that they know, and that they have got the right attitude for getting it right.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay, well, you'll see that I've put something else up on the slide, but Tom, yeah, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yes, just again, I was talking to people yesterday, and with social distancing, it actually means that the people who are working much more efficiently. So you send plumbers into work in a bathroom, he hasn't got the tiler working on top of him or below him or underneath his legs or whatever, because it's not allowed. So I think there's, from that sort of area, whilst there clearly are less people, the efficiency of the individual people working is significantly higher. And I think also the point that Colin made about probably that the top people have been maintained, have been kept on, rather than some of the slightly less top, let's put it that way, also contributes, I think.
Yeah. Great. Well, that leads on really, really nicely to the next point I wanted to discuss, actually, which is to identify that we've got, I think, 4, might be more than 4, different groups of people affected by this current situation. So we've got staff who are still at work and probably working harder than ever. We've maybe got staff who are still on payroll and nominally at work, but maybe doing an awful lot less. Maybe they're at home looking after their kids while still being paid. You've got staff who've been furloughed. And then there are supply chain and contractors who maybe are completely out of work, or possibly even people who've been made redundant. So what I'd like to do is, here we go. There's another poll now in the chat box. What I'm asking is, of those 4 different groups, who do you think is the biggest worry in terms of how their behaviour is likely to be impacted by the current lockdown or the current situation? It's like most people are worried about staff who are currently working harder than ever. And interestingly, nobody has said they're most worried about the staff who are kept on but currently not doing a great deal. So in second place, we've got the contractors and supply chain who've been laid off. So it looks like the majority of people are worried most about the staff who are currently working harder than usual. And the next place is people who've actually been laid off or supply chain who are out of work. Ask you either in the chat box or to unmute yourself. Can anyone comment on why they are most concerned about staff who are currently working harder than ever? Ian, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think so from a furlough perspective, the people who've generally been furloughed are the support functions within our business anyway. So what's happening is those folk that sit on people's shoulders and remind them they've got to do a good job are not there anymore. So my concern is not that the people are expressively doing it on purpose, but they haven't got the people there to remind them what they should be doing. So the good behaviours that the support functions deliver are not there. So I have a particular concern within our business in one particular sector that they have furloughed quite a lot of their support staff. And my concern is the longer that goes on, that will lead to if you like, a fall off in behaviours.
Interesting. Okay. Has anyone else got a comment on that? A similar or different viewpoint?
Yeah. So I think we touched on it a couple of meetings ago about program issues. So what we've seen recently is sites opening up, trying to complete the works, but you've got reduced labour. You've got certain skill sets that may well still be furloughed. So contractors trying to complete specific items of work with their own internal staff, if you like. But what I've seen is defects being repaired, but the programme challenges these works to be corrected, but not allowing time within the programme. So what you're seeing is specialist contractors not necessarily being available to come to fit within the existing or revised programme. So those works are now being carried out by less skilled or less experienced operatives.
Oh, right. Interesting. Okay, so people are sort of muddling their way through with the resources they've got available, it sounds like.
Yeah, so I mean, I won't name the project, but it's a fairly large project and it's got some defects, some notable defects. But now that the site has opened up, it's probably working at 60% productivity with about 50 to 60% of the normal workforce. Some of the defects required to be repaired are done by specialist contractors. Those specialist contractors are only just coming off furlough. They're not going to be available for another 5 or 6 weeks. The programme doesn't allow these defects to wait for 5 or 6 weeks. Therefore, the solution for the project manager is give me the advice, tell me what I've got to do, and I'll get some able guys to do it. On the face of it, the work will be completed, and you'll look at the corrected defects and well, yeah, looks good and all the rest of it. But that then bleeds into the latent defects down the line. There's no guarantee that these defective works that have been corrected are going to be long lasting.
Tom, I can see you've got your hand up. I'm sure you've got something to say on that.
Well, I just thought I'd read out a comment in case you didn't pick it up from Nicola, who said, yes, I completely agree, and all that one of our quality team is on furlough, which is sort of probably sort of, unfortunately, from a GIRI perspective, just sums up how important getting it right is to some of our major companies. And quite clearly, it's not at the top of their priority list, which is, well, it's pretty alarming, let's put it that way, but probably not as surprising as I probably shouldn't be surprised, but that's clearly going to create issues because you can sort of see the decisions being made now. Well, we've got to ramp up, but yeah, we just got to get the production people going. We'll worry about getting it right a little bit later, a bit like what Andy's just been saying, really. So anyway, part of the same theme.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the alarm bells that were ringing in my head as Andy was talking there was that it sounds like errors might be coming back again and again and again. So it's not even that there are more errors, it's that the same errors are getting repeated and hitting you 2 or 3 times. So, okay, really interesting. Right, conscious of time, what we'll move on to now is an extract from one of our training sessions. Behaviours. How do people behave? And I think for us to be able to have any hope of influencing behaviour or managing behaviour, we first of all need to be able to categorise it and understand it. So let's start off by saying, well, we can think about behaviour on an axis. So let's say at one end it is helpful, and on the other end it's unhelpful. So that's fairly obvious. We want people to be helpful. That's good. Unhelpful is bad. So that's fairly straightforward. But then let's add another axis to this. And let's say, well, let's consider, we could call it, let's call it agreement. So agree and disagree. So this is a question of how much do people do exactly what they're told to do, and how much do they question and think for themselves? So you could have a robot that does exactly what you program it to do. It's in complete agreement. On the other hand, you could have someone who completely thinks for themselves all the time and always does whatever they think they should do and doesn't listen. Okay, so this gives us some different quadrants. Now, if we've got someone who is disagreeable, disagrees with you, and unhelpful, they're going to be down here. So that's clearly a big problem. Someone who is purposely causing you problems. So that clearly is a bad place to be. Now let's have a look at the opposite of that. So we can have someone who is helpful and always does exactly what they're told. So that sounds a bit better, but what this basically means is that they're not thinking for themselves at all. So they're not going to be doing anything at all to avoid error. They're just going to be doing precisely what you say, a bit like having a robot. And then we've got this area here, and this is the real danger zone. So this is what we call unhelpful agreement. So that is people who do exactly what they're told, even if they know it's wrong. So let's have a look at some examples of that type of behaviour. Provide some sort of explanation. How does this sort of thing happen?
Responsibility. Taking responsibility. There is a belief that if you do something under your own volition, then you're taking responsibility, therefore you're potentially liable for something.
Interesting. Okay, so I've been told to do this. If I do anything different, it's my problem. It becomes my problem. If I do what I'm told, here we go, not being listened to in the past, doing as you're told and not thinking, lack of communication. It's what shows on my drawing. I've done my job. Anyone seen anything like this? Who works in highways? Who's any cyclists amongst us want to explain when they've encountered one of these excellent cycle lanes? Okay, let's have a look at one more. Now this is a good one. So clearly that walkway is compliant. It's more than 1.8 metre wide. 2 wheelchairs can get through there. Good. Anyone want to provide a comment on that? No, it's saying, yeah, plenty of them in London. Yeah. Different departments. Okay. So that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and that probably wasn't just, clearly wasn't just a site issue. That's more of an interface issue. Okay, yeah. Jeff is saying there, design interfaces. What about this one? I mean, there's so much wrong here. It's probably difficult to pick it out, but we're starting to see, and I particularly like this one. Someone's told to go and put up a handrail. It's dangerous when you turn that valve. Go and put a handrail up, please. So if we come back to our chart, we were thinking about this corner up here, where it's unhelpful agreement, people doing exactly what they're told to do. But what we want to do is actually get down into this bottom corner. So our sweet spot is not up here, it's here. We want to be helpful. We want people to be helpful, but we want them to think for themselves as well. So it's this helpful disagreement is going to be the sweet spot. And that is how everyone is going to be thinking about how they can avoid those errors from happening. So maybe if, so I've got Jeff there saying ownership. Does anyone else want to sort of chip in, contribute? What do you think are the factors that either make people behave like this or can make them behave in a way where they're going to helpfully disagree? So values and business culture. Nicola, that's interesting. So can you expand on what you mean by that, please, in terms of values and business culture?
Well, I think what you were saying about the idea that people who just do what they're told to do and not question whether it's right or wrong, that's to me to do. It's to do with ethics. It's not all to do with and also the culture then needs to be blame free. If you're doing something, you have to have a culture of not being blamed for it, or if you're raising a question, you're not being put down and said, "Oh, just do as you're told. It's not right," kind of thing. So I think it's got to come down to values. You have to have an ethical duty, but also your business culture has to be right. If it's not right, the business culture, then you're going to set yourself up to fail a little bit.
Okay, really interesting. Does anyone else want to add to that in terms of that blame culture and business culture? Does anyone want to add to what Nicola was saying there?
Yeah, I'd like to add a bit because I did raise a bit, Nick. One was to do with competence, but that's also linked to consequences as well. And I think it's also tied into culture. We're starting to be in a society where we're not getting penalties as much anymore. Especially in industries where NCRs are like, oh yeah, the insurance will pay for that. So just having that people to move away from that mindset. No one is taking ownership for these defects anymore because they think somebody else is going to cover it for them or on their behalf.
Okay, so we've mentioned there about ownership and it's not their problem. So that's interesting. So we've got a sort of dichotomy, it sounds like, that people are hiding from, don't want to do something new because they don't want to be blamed for it. But also you can say, well, people don't think they're going to be blamed if it's wrong, so they don't care. So it sounds like we've got both sides of that as being weighed up. Leadership shadow. So Ian, what could you explain what that means?
Sorry, just come off mute. Yeah. I mean, this is around. It probably goes back to what I talked about before. Are the leaders talking about these things when they have their similar calls with their sites? Are they talking about getting it right, or are they talking about just driving productivity, making sure they're social distance, which is absolutely right, but concentrating on those two things? So the biggest push I've got, and I think I'm going back to Nicola was saying, we've lost a lot of quality folk. So I'm pushing with the leadership of our business. You've got to be asking the right questions and making sure that our projects still understand they've got to make sure they comply with requirements and whatever that may be, and demonstrate they're doing that as well. And I'm not sure that the full leadership are doing that everywhere across the industry that we work in.
That's really interesting. I heard a phrase the other day that really struck a chord with me, and it was they called it the say-do gap. What is the gap between what leadership say and what leadership do? And I wonder if that might be something that we are experiencing now, is a big say-do gap, particularly in relation to quality. I think Steve, have you got your hand up there?
Yeah. On a similar theme, really, on culture and leadership. If you have a culture where leaders actively invite people to challenge, and that's valued, and you can openly, say to users, "Oh, I just want to challenge whatever is being discussed." If you've got that kind of culture, then this kind of helpful disagreement, it is something which becomes just part of what you do, and there's no stigma, there's no threat to it, because you're challenging what a leader is saying, because previously to that, you've been encouraged to do so. So I think that's a big part of the culture, which encourages helpful disagreement.
Brilliant. Okay, and so it sounds like you're saying it's not a quick short-term fix. You have to be consistent in demonstrating this behaviour as an organisation, and if you're in leadership, you have to make sure people feel comfortable with that challenge, that helpful disagreement. Is that
Absolutely? And I think the word challenge is actually quite helpful. Helpful disagreement is a bit of a mouthful, but if you're just constructively challenging somebody's comment or assumption, then that's quite an easy thing to. It's easy to say, but it's obviously difficult to change a culture if it's not part of your culture.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll just flash up another screen. So these are just a list of some of the reasons why people fall into these different categories. So the reasons why people are likely to be in this unhelpful agreement, doing exactly what they're told, is because they're not listened to, or they're not valued, they're not treated well, they fear reprisals. And then the opposite of all of that is what's going to make people be willing to do this challenge we've talked about. And a lot of it is about the way the leadership behave. So are they willing to admit when they're wrong? Do they listen? And do they listen to understand? So we've started to get a feel for what are the factors that influence the way people behave. But what I'd like to do now, I've put another chat box. So if you can please have a look at that questionnaire. So the questions, the options that we proposed were: is it because people feel the project they're working on isn't valuable or important? Is it because their personal contribution isn't valued? Frustration at the changes and apparent inefficiencies? Not having the resources they require? Job insecurity? Confusion, lack of clear direction? Feeling like they're not being listened to and can't influence decisions? Feeling unfairly treated, possibly to do with pay cuts or working conditions? Feeling that their efforts aren't being noticed or valued? Fear of reprisals for errors? And also personal and emotional stress. So let's see what responses we've had there. So it looks like the biggest one is, okay, interesting, feeling like that people's personal contribution isn't being valued or recognised. And also we've got this one down here, confusion and lack of clear direction. So those are jumping out as the top two, closely followed by people feeling like they're not being listened to or fear of reprisals. So I wonder, anyone who commented on those, could you maybe either raise your hand or just shout out and explain why you think these are particular problems at the moment? Maybe.
Yeah, I think that there is maybe a slight misconception as to what leadership is from every tier within the industry. I do think that some people view our PMs and site managers and everybody else, when they're developing their method statements, are they actually asking the people how they envisage in doing a job or a particular task, or they're just writing something prescriptive, and that then is being briefed to the individuals and teams, and it's not inviting any feedback, which would then encourage any change for a better way of doing something. So I think there's a heavy flow of documentation and briefings from top down, but not necessarily the same force of flow of information coming back up to adapt and change things.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So does anyone else want to comment on that? And do we think that's being exacerbated by the current crisis? Anyone else got any thoughts on that?
Hi, yeah, Nicola. I think completely agree with that. If I think back to when this COVID thing first kicked off, how reactive we were as an industry in terms of how quick we need to change all our method statements, and think of a better way of working, and how can we digitally work, when actually if we'd have just thought about it a bit further in advance, we probably could have written all that in terms of quality plans and everything else. So I definitely agree that I think we don't speak to people, we don't ask them how they actually do a job. And I think it's come really apparent recently with this whole, do they need to be 2 meters apart, or can they do it using technology, or lifting it instead of doing it manually or whatever? And I think it's become really apparent now that we don't really think and talk to the people who are actually doing the job. We just make an assumption they're doing it the best way they can because we've given them a document to tell them that way, so it must be right.
Interesting. Okay, and I see Jeff has made a comment there about RAMs being delegated down the line to incompetence. So that sounds like it has a similar sort of feel to what you're saying there, Nicola. Jeff, do you want to expand on that?
Yes, it's something I've noticed over the years. You start with I'd have said a schedule of plans, which is quite a coherent one, and then when it comes down to, well, we need to get out in the field to do some work, all of this ends up as a rush, and it gets delegated down the chain, probably to the graduate engineer who has never seen I'd have said the works activity, and right. At which point it gets signed off quickly and everyone just goes out and does something and they ignore it.
Yeah, interesting. Ian, I can see you've got your hand up as well. Have you got a comment on that?
Yeah, I think obviously the focus has been on the health and safety side of individuals on our sites, and we've had loads of good examples, and I'm sure loads of people have shared across the intranet and whatever else we do on Yammer about how well we're doing this and how well we're doing that and keeping people healthy and safe. But I think because of that, and I think it came up as item 3 on here, I think people are going to be less loath to raise their hand and say they've got an error, because there's been so much focus on making sure that we're working safely. If they then create an error, they're going to go, bloody hell, look at all the work we've got here, and we're not going to put, people are not going to put their hands up, I don't think, to say that there's something gone wrong. So I think there may be an increase in people covering things up because they're going to be afraid to say they have an error. And
wow, okay, that's a significant observation there, isn't it? Is it Aid? Have you got your? I can see you've got your hand up as well. Do you want to comment on that?
I'll mute there. Yes, totally agree there. I think what Jeff said, that rings true. In the graduate just fresh off the boat gets handed, delegated or handed this amount of workload without the right balance of competence. And one, they're not able to challenge when it's wrong, or stand in or defend themselves, or even if they do see it's wrong, they're afraid of the level of authority or what sort of recompense that they get from that. And there's the other area of loss in morale in a time like this. For example, in certain organizations, when if a fraction have been furloughed, but the other fraction are taking a pay cut, which some organizations have had to do. But now you get that percentage of 20% of people of an organization doing 80% of the job and 80% of the wage that they're on. So morale is an all-time low right now. And when that's there, the attention level can drop as well. So
great. Oh, thank you for that. That sounds, yeah, you've sort of described a perfect storm there, really. Now I'm conscious that we're due to wrap up, so maybe I'll hand back to you, Tom, and you might be able to sum up some of the key points we've covered today.
So, okay, well, thanks, Nick, for that, and thank you, everybody, for all of your contributions. I thought that was really interesting, a little bit sobering, but as I said a little bit earlier, not terribly surprising. So it's interesting to hear some of you saying about everybody is concentrating on health and safety, and that's always right. But therefore, and that's all they're worrying about. and maybe quality will or won't be okay. And we talked about ownership. People talked about, forgive me if I can't get all the names, somebody talked about, well, method statements and things like that. Nobody consults with the people actually doing it. Well, interestingly enough, one of the early sessions that we did with one of our members was about the fact that nobody was following method statements and didn't really believe in the RAMs and what's the point of inspection and test plans and all of that. And their solution was actually, and it was a fairly front-end company, was to involve all of their foremen and people like that in the preparation of those documents so that they actually understood why they were being asked to do it. And when you get that involvement, then people are much happier to do what they're asked to do because they get the point of it. I think that's human nature, isn't it? But I think several people, certainly Nicola did and Ian did, and I think Jeff did, talked about culture. And I think what is really quite scary to me is the fact that, and I didn't know that until this session, is that a lot of the people who are trying to make sure we get things right seem to have been decided that actually they don't really matter. And that's a really big condemnation of our industry, I think. And I'd hope that we might be getting better. But clearly, when the push comes to shove, perhaps people don't really get it still. Because, of course, if you look at it the other way, there's a huge amount of cost, as we all know, when we make mistakes. So, yet apparently we're prepared to allow that to continue. Ian, I noticed your comment about the leadership is interested in digital assurance, I think was the word you used. Great, fantastic, and we should use digital tools as much as we can. But I think all of you have heard me say before, digital is one tool, but unless you actually want to get it right in the first place, and unless that's part of your ethos, then you're sunk. And again, some of you will have heard me say this before, and I'll wrap up after this, everybody ought to read the Stephanie Bartlett report from Persimmon about their culture and why they were making huge mistakes. And basically she was saying the board needs to decide whether they want to get it right or whether they want to get it wrong. So with that, I'm going to just wrap up. We did have some other slides, but I'm not going to show them because I think it's just best just to complete. Thank you for coming. Thanks very much for attending. Thanks for your time. Keep safe. Goodbye.